What we want to talk about is what makes marriage marriage. In other words, what's at the heart of it? What's its essence, particularly from a biblical perspective, which is traditionally what's been the perspective in our culture as a whole. And let me throw out this question to you as we begin. So I want to ask about your lists, both before you got married and how they might have changed or what you would recommend them to be afterwards. In other words, what was the kind of person you were looking for prior to getting married? But now that you've been in it for a while, how has your list changed? How would you advise others in sort of the qualities that they ought to be looking for in the person that they are marrying, in light of the fact that this promise is at the heart of it?
You know, I don't know about you. We've actually never talked about this. This should be fascinating.
All right, you go first.
We met each other when we were really young. You know, we were in college, and I didn't have a list. It's just like, he's cute, we hang out, this is cool. And the relationship devolved over years, and suddenly we were getting married. Like, we chose each other for sure, and we dated, we broke up, we got back together. That was like our...
You broke up with me, just to be clear.
It worked out. It worked out. That was our choosing point, right? Like, we're gonna do it. But, you know, it's interesting because I have not actively thought of the question of what would my list look like now, but I wonder if somebody had posed that question to Kristen in college, what I would have said. I know it would be different. You know, I think about Joe's developing ability to serve me, what that actually looks like, to be patient with me in my complete otherness, my complete weirdness in the ways that I'm not like him. And I think, oh man, you know, I didn't know that even needed to be on a list. And that's huge.
It seems like such an impossible question of how to grow together over the course of a lifetime. It's like the growth question to me, and maybe this is better answered by Tim. I think you've probably seen a lot more of this than we have, but how do two people do things like reach for opportunities and make a home and try and change career, like lose a job and get a different job and change careers and have children. And, you know, I'm such a different person as a mother than I was as a single person and that I was as a wife without children.
I think we've been really effective in making those changes. And part of me wonders whether it's luck.
Right, like so far, I think it's one of the biggest questions that I have about how marriage works still at this point and how we're gonna move forward.
And there is that, I think, that background fear or question of, is this thing that may look like it's about me growing my career, is it really serving our family or our marriage or not, and how do I know?
Okay, I'll say there's three things I think you need to have on your list of things that would help you grow throughout the marriage. But none of these three are quick and easy, even to explain. One, I would say, is a common worldview. And by a worldview, I mean you basically understand reality the same way. And I'm talking about things like, what are human beings for? I know this is going to sound philosophical. What are human beings for? How do you decide right and wrong? You know, when we die, what happens? I mean, I know that you say that's religion. Well, yeah, it's a little even bigger than religion. It's more like, it's what John Rawls calls comprehensive views. I mean, people have different words for them. It means your common understanding of what human beings are for and what human life is about. And so it is kind of a matter of religion. And there has to be at least, I'm not saying you both have to belong to this, you know, you can't be a Baptist and you can't be a Presbyterian and be married. What I am saying is you have to have basically have the same view of what life is about, the same faith, or lack thereof. There needs to be some kind of compatibility there. Secondly, you have to learn how to solve problems, which means not always find that one person's always giving in to the other. Or that you're just staying away and just saying, we're not going to go there.
You have to learn to fight well.
You really have to learn to not just fight well, but to fight through, and you actually have some solutions. Now, thirdly, what C.S. Lewis calls a common mythos. And a mythos is this. You go to an art gallery, or you go to an art museum, and you spend like an hour in front of a particular painting. In fact, you get back there every couple months because you just can't get enough of it. And you actually notice that there's somebody else who, or a couple other people who tend to show up every couple months to look at it too. They'll probably be good friends. In other words, when there's certain pieces of music, certain narratives, certain novels, certain artworks, certain things that they give you a sense of meaning in life, and you find somebody else who does too, you've got the basis for a friendship. It's more than just we both like to play tennis. I would actually say, even though common interest like that is great, it's more like if you read the same books and they both make you cry, and then that's what I mean by mythos. So I would say those three things, that gives you what you need to move forward, not actually money, not actually temperament, introvert, extrovert. All that stuff is probably not nearly as important as those three things.
Tim, and we're at least occasionally using the language of covenant. It's a language that Christians use about the vows that are made. What's the difference between a covenant promise and a contract?
A covenant is actually a combination of law and love. It's a contract all by itself is a fairly, sets up a kind of consumer relationship. So if I have a contract and you are to give me a certain quality of lettuce and I'll pay you so much per head, we have a contract until you don't give me, you might say, the quality of lettuce that you said you were going to give me. Now I can break you've broken the contract, so the contract's void. In a covenant, it's a combination of law and love, which means on the one hand, it is public and binding. That's the law side. But it's also love. What you're really saying is, I'm going to be there for you even when you're not everything that you say you're going to be. So it means I'm committed to the person and I'm committed to the relationship, not just to myself. Whereas in a contract, it's frankly selfish. In other words, I'm committed to the contract as long as I'm getting out of it what I want. If as soon as I'm not, then the contract's void. A covenant is a binding combination of law and love. So in some ways, it's more intimate than just a personal relationship because of the binding commitment.
So essentially what you're saying is it's not so much fidelity to the legal word, but it's fidelity to a person.
Let me ask you this, and maybe we can start over here, because you know, I'm not Christian, and on the one hand, I feel like Tara and I would answer the three topics that you touched on very, very similarly, and I can see how that's reflected in our marriage. But what do you feel, and what do you two feel makes Christian vows unique or perhaps essential, as opposed to, like, we were married in a Unitarian church, and I feel very passionately about the vows that we took, and we did write them ourselves. But I would love to hear, actually, from all of you, what you feel like makes the Christian vows unique.
Well, I'll start, but I won't go as far as, I'd like to hear what everybody else is saying too. One time I was talking with a Jewish man and a Christian woman who came and said, "Would you marry us?" And I basically said, well, I said, look, I love you both. I wish you both the best. If you get married, I'll be as friendly and supportive as possible, but I'd rather not do the wedding. And I explained the reason why. I basically said, if your faith is at the very center of your life, which I hope it would be, then that would be part of your center you can't share with the other person. And so you're either going to have to you're going to have to kick the faith out to the periphery, or suffer the feeling like this person I'm married to doesn't understand this very important thing, which is kind of very isolating and awful. What's funny is they said, that's funny, our rabbi said the same thing. The rabbi said, I love you, I'd be supportive of you, but I still won't do the wedding. And he said exactly the same thing. So at one level, I would say the reason I advise this is not because Christianity is unique, even though I do think it is, and I think we ought to move on and answer that question. I think even if at one level, just making sure that the most important faith commitments that you have are shared by the other person, it's actually just common sense, so that you really feel like you can be intimate. Otherwise, you either have to push it out to the periphery, or you can't be intimate in one area where you really need to be intimate. So that's one level.
You know, I would say that the promises that are made in different faith traditions, and no faith tradition at all, as long as they're promises and not proclamations, are not all that different from each other. I think what potentially is different is that from a Christian perspective, we on the one hand believe that human beings are uniquely able to make promises because we're made in the image of God. And it's actually, we're built to do it. We're created to make promises, but not only are we created to make them, which sort of enriches that promise to some degree, and you say, oh, yeah, this is what I'm built to do, but we also believe in a promise-making God. Others want to comment on that, reflect on that?
I consider God to be an active participant in our marriage. And so that seemed a little theoretical when we got married. It felt really good. It seemed really like the right thing to do. Like, this is great. God sanctions our marriage. What God has brought together, let no one tear apart.
I talk about a three-stranded cord,
Yes,
like
the
the two of us and
three-stranded
God
cord.
and bound together. You know, that sounds like what a great picture.
Yes.
And, you know.
But now, as we've walked through that, as we've lived this out, one of the things that defines our marriage in a way that I was not anticipating, and I don't know that I ever could have, is that Joe will come to me and he'll speak God's promises to me. So there's something outside of the context of our marriage that we both understand that is bigger than us and that we believe is really important. And he'll come to me and he won't just tell me that he loves me, he'll tell me that God loves me. And he'll remind me of the promises that have been made that are actually bigger than our marriage and that are being worked out through our marriage.
Sam, I would just add what makes the Christian commitment unique is Christian identity is different than any other kind. All other religions and modern secularism, every other culture I know, your identity and your self-worth is basically achieved. You have to perform. You either have to live up to religious standards or your own standards or whatever, and you achieve it. And so that means that your self-worth goes up and down depending on how well you think you're doing. And you need other people's, to bolster it by saying you're great. Christian identity is received. You're completely accepted by God by grace because of Jesus. And that gives you a deep combination of both humility because you got it as a gift, but at the same time unbelievable strength because you're completely affirmed by God. The only person whose opinion in the universe counts accepts and loves you. Now, to the degree that sinks in, the fact is that most Christians don't live into that identity, but just a little part, and it takes time to live into it. But if two Christians are married and are living into that identity together, it gives you a kind of security that enables you to be extraordinarily open about your own flaws, and it enables you to give criticism and take the wrath of the other person, because their wrath temporarily doesn't destroy you the way it does if that person's love is a big part of your self-identity and your self-worth. So it gives you the ability to criticize each other and take criticism from each other in a way I don't think any other kind of identity does. So there are some things about Christianity that are unique that give a marriage a particular kind of strength.
Sam, Tara, you asked the question. Reaction to that, is that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you said sounds beautiful to my ear.
We have differing opinions of what role God and religion should play in our marriage and our lives. And now that we have a son, certainly how we want to raise him and what belief system we want to introduce him to and raise him in. And we had a colicky baby. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that particular challenge.
Really?
Yeah. And when we have had a two-pronged marriage, when both of those threads were coming completely unraveled, there was no third thread to stabilize us. And that was a really challenging time for us. And I think it inspired a lot of the conversation that brought us here to this point today. And, Joe, you talked about having the same place to take comfort in during crisis times. And for us, that was a real crisis time because we were going through so much personal growth and our marriage was going through so much change. And we had this new baby who is a complete lunatic to take care of, depending on us, and we were underslept and all of the challenges that are,
I may have had
really
my doubts
typical
about God, but during that time, I did wonder if he was punishing us.
All the challenges, the traditional standard challenges of new parenthood, plus the screaming. And I think that's been something that we have struggled with. We can take solace in different places, which then feels divisive.
And I'll be candid in saying that I think for our worldview, to the extent that we share one, and I think we really do, you know, like when your marriage is based on the two of you and God, you know, like a stool is always stable. Like 3 points are always going to be steady. And I think for us, when we look to a lot of different things in addition to ourselves, like I've been to, I can't tell you how many restaurants where that four-legged table is just a little rickety. And I feel like we have supports all over the place, which is, you know, in friends, in family, in shared beliefs, and all these things. And sometimes that's really robust, and sometimes that does wobble. I have to acknowledge
the times
that.
when it is robust, it has been very supportive for our marriage in crisis times. And I think one of the things that we as a couple that is not overtly Christian needs to be conscious of is that when there's a crisis time, we can't turn to two different posts. When there's only 3 posts and the two of you need to turn to a different post, there's only one post to turn to.
I get the sense that you know where to go when things
You know where to
get
go.
tough.
And we have to make sure consistently and together that we are not turning to 2 different places to take solace and reshore.
I was just going to say, you know, the traditional wedding ceremony in the Christian church, you actually make 2 vows. Before you make vows to each other, you first make a vow to God. It becomes the foundation for which, you know, you make your promise to one another. You say, you know, hey, before God, I am going to, you know, give myself to this person. Only then do you turn and make promises to one another. And I think even that promise to God, however, is made with this recognition that God's made a promise to us. And that's why we take this crazy risk of making these vows to each other, of, you know, making this insane promise to be there through thick and thin with another person. It's because we know God is through there with us through thick and thin, and has ultimately demonstrated that by giving himself radically in Jesus.
The key concept in this session is the covenant. We live in a culture in which almost all our relationships are what I could call consumer relationships. In a consumer relationship, you're in a relationship with another person or an organization as long as it benefits you, as long as you feel like I'm getting benefit and the price is right. And as soon as you feel like the other person is not giving you the value for what you're putting into it, you're out of there.
At the very heart is God promising, I will be your God, you will be my people, and I will give myself to you, and you will give yourself to me. Not that we understood that really very clearly from the vantage point of the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, when Jesus shows up, then his self-donation on the cross for our salvation is really where the whole concept of covenant makes perfect sense now, that God is giving himself to the final uttermost in order to keep us as his people.
Yes.
The covenant is so binding that he will go to death and even beyond for it.
And the reason why we are called to and enabled to make promises to our spouse and to say, I'm going to be there even if you're not everything I would like you to be, even if it's not benefiting you. Well, I was actually going to say, when it says in Romans 5, Jesus died for us while we were yet enemies. And as my wife will quickly attest, and I will too, there are times in which marriage feels a lot like that you are sacrificing yourself for the other person who doesn't seem to be on your side at all. And yet, because Jesus did that for us, we can do that for each other.
But marriage is not all just, you know, sacrificially donating yourself and having a very, you know, difficult, martyred kind of attitude towards it. There's mutual fulfillment through mutual sacrifice, and it's different. It's different for men, it's different for women. We both get to play the Jesus role, but we are, in our different gendered ways, sacrificing and finding fulfillment. And actually, that's really the topic for the whole next session. So I hope you come back, and when you do, we'll talk more about that. See you then.